Wonderful. So I'm just going to give a minute or so as other people find their way into this room. Excited to see who shows up and also what you're all thinking. All right. So as we get started, I am going to share the Padlet link in the chat so you all have access to it. So it's open from the very beginning. This is the tool that we're going to be using to just capture some of our thoughts to some of the prompts that we have for you today for today's discussion around the ethics of AI and the promise of AI to help with taking unstructured data to make it structured for use in LERs. So just a little bit of a background. I've been in the LER space about 2.5, 3 years now. At Digital Promise, we're doing projects on actually how do we inclusively design LERs with learners, workers, and especially those most marginalized and historically excluded. So super excited to be here today to collaborate and co-design with you all. One thing I'd love to do, we do not have a whole heap of time by which to go around the room and do introductions. So what we would love you to do is visit the Padlet board. You will see the first column. This is going to be our first activity today. And if you see the first column, you'll see a prompt there. Please introduce yourself and share a skill or experience you have learned or are learning that brings you joy, yet very few people know about it. You might not have a credential for it. It might not be on your job description. I will share just briefly. So I paint, I'm an abstract artist in my free time. And also I DIY, I flip houses and apartments and so forth. So they're things I have zero credentials for, zero job descriptions for, yet I think, quite a cool group of skills there. Jen, what about you?
Yes, I didn't say something as fun as you, but I did say that I just started with the lab back in the fall. I came out of higher ed for the last 20 years. And something I worked really hard on over the last couple of years as a vice president for student affairs was culturally responsive customer service for the entire division of student affairs to really understand how to do that. Proud of that work.
Yeah. So just to get us all started and sort of familiar with the Padlet board, if you haven't got access to the board, the link is in the chat. I'll keep adding it though, because I know that Zoom doesn't necessarily make history of chat always available. If you can go to the Padlet and if you press the plus button at the bottom of the screen of the first column, you will see, actually, I'm going to share my screen and show you all if you've not used a Padlet before. So you'll see here, let me just close the doc. You'll see here our Padlet. And our first question is an introduce yourself. Jess and I have jumped in and already started. Wonderful, Matt. Thank you. So you just press the plus button at the bottom. You can write a subject matter there. You can describe if you want. If you want to upload a picture, you can. The joy of Padlet. It is multimedia, multimodal. But yeah, if you could just write a little bit about yourself and post it there, that would be wonderful. To give us an idea of who's in the room, who's in the space. And as we're seeing people populate, would anyone else love to come off mic and share about a skill or experience that brings you joy that people might not necessarily know about?
I'll go because I put it there. Well, actually, I have a different one that's on there. I've got a band with my brother who's this called Governing Bodies, and we sing about nerdy things like data governance.
Oh, that's cool. All right, we need links. You need to put a link to YouTube
all right, to my SoundCloud. All right,
Spotify, SoundCloud. Please put that in there. That's fantastic. Anyone else like to share as we're just getting started?
I had to say, Matt, that sounds like a name that ChatGPT might have generated for you. That's a pretty good band name.
We actually did our latest song was a song that we had ChatGPT write for us.
Of course it did.
That is very cool. Now I want to know whether the AI being promised in Experience U might be able to actually determine what your skills are and what ChatGPT skills are. Anyway, we'll get to that. Wonderful. Okay. So what's interesting is this is the promise of Experience You. This is the hope and the promise of this project of being able to, there's a lot of what we call unstructured skills, learnings, experiences that aren't, and I do this, structured in the term of they're not in a job description, they're not recognized in a credential. There are many skills we are, at Digital Promise, we talk about as learners and workers, we are collectors. We collect experiences, we collect skills, we also collect credentials. And a credential is something that gives credence to your skills, your identity, anything it's giving credence to. So it's not just a certificate or a degree. It could be a whole plethora of things. Recommendation letters could be considered credentials. Photographs of a piece of work could be considered credentials. Yet we live in a world where often we think of education credentials first and foremost. So I want to go to the next prompt that we have for you. And I'm just curious, and I'm sure Jess is and the team, what were some questions that came up for you during the presentation today? And please unmic and just discuss, and then post them at the Padlet board as well, so that we can all discuss them. So what came up for you? Any questions, any thoughts?
I had a question listening more around what about this current experience of our approach in dealing with skills and how we apply that to certain jobs or careers, understanding more about that problem space, like what the issues are with that current model, just so that it's easier then to see the benefits of and the intent behind doing something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good observation. What came up for others? And Melina, would you be able to post that on the Padlet? If
Sure.
Jess, that'd be great. It's really good observation. What came up for everyone else? Yeah, Matt, go. Yeah, please unmic, interrupt.
I don't want to dominate the conversation. I feel like I already got my airtime, but
It's okay.
I think for one of the big concerns around ethics I have is that like we're a lot of the AI solutions are going to kind of lean on the same large language models because those are just super expensive to build. So we'll just kind of all inherit whatever biases are in those models. And we've already got really clear research that shows that the internet that's trained on has a bunch of implicit biases in it. Like the phrase doctor is implicitly more associated with maleness, and nurse implicitly more associated with femaleness. And that's like deeply in the math of these models, but it'll show up in weird ways and how we recommend. So I think there's this weird propagation of bias that we have in some ways like very little control over how it originates.
Yeah.
And have to do a lot of work to figure out how to prevent downstream. And that's very top of mind for me.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Please add that to that's a really great thought and idea. And there is implicit bias already in existing models and research. Yeah, who else would love to? Nidhi, is it Nidhi?
Thank you. It's Nidhi.
Nidhi? All right. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
And thank you for raising that point about the implicit biases. But, I think the only thing I would want to add to that, and also something, that, that occurred to me during the course of the presentation was, part of the reason of the biases is the data that we feed in itself. So, how are we going to be vigilant going forward that the right kind of data points are being fed in to either balance out the biases or ensure that, the algorithms that are working behind those models are, kind of justified, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Makes perfect sense. Any other questions or thoughts came up during the presentation?
I had another.
Yeah.
It was just a line written, and then I think it was repeated by Colin. This reference to skills as currency is maybe a little scary for me, coming from an ethics perspective, because, how do we create something that's flexible enough so that we're not reducing skills to something binary, like this is something that you either have or you don't have. How do we lean a little further into, something that empowers people or gives people the flexibility or some sort of, inference that maybe you don't have a particular skill, but you have some other growth related skill, so that the skill that you're missing could easily be, built upon or something like that.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that's coming up in our work at Digital Promise is the skills in certain data is of what we have now, not aspirational of what we want to develop or where we want to go. So it's really interesting in transitions, for example, how that could be best represented. So interesting. Love it. So I'm now going to move us to the next prompt, which, one of the promises of Experience You of this project is to make, how might we make past experiences, skills that are unstructured or data that's not documented about our skills and our experiences or in a digital form, ready for inclusion in these learning and employment records. And I kind of want to ask, I'm kind of curious, could you raise your hands? How many people have heard about learning and employment records before? You can either do it digitally or physically, just to give me a sense of, yeah. Okay. So these are technologies. Yeah, most people have some understanding of them. Awesome. And they're technologies, that are promising to make data on your learning and employment record, your experiences more accessible to you as a learner and worker. All our learning data and employment data is currently in multiple systems across multiple organizations. So the big task is, how do we actually make it accessible, useful, inclusive, and also the data owned by you? So one of the questions or promises is that it's going to make these things that are unstructured in a structured form. So I'm curious, how might we mitigate or make aware the bias in doing this? So if someone else is structuring your unstructured data, how might we mitigate bias or make that bias aware, make us aware of the bias? What are some thoughts we might have? Oh, yeah, Padlet link is a coming if you're just joining. Welcome. So what are your thoughts on how we might mitigate?
I mean, one way to maybe think of it is the labels that drive the containers these things fit in.
Yeah.
Right. So to the point that was made before, if you already have a term which is already laden with bias, is there a way of maybe unbundling that or decoupling that in a deliberate way, by using terminology that isn't as bias laden? So maybe, I mean, in the past, this has been done with like stewardesses not being called flight attendants. There's a way of making that less gender biased, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I don't have quite the answer how to do that from a programmatic perspective, but I would imagine naming conventions is something that people in computer science love to play with, and there could be something there.
Yeah. I love that idea. Anyone else?
I just posted something briefly that there's a relatively new but pretty rapidly getting adopted concept in just data workflows of data contracts that are electronically specified and flow with the data. And one of the cool things is it provides context with the data that's coming in and can actually provide restrictions and policies around the data.
Yeah.
And so I think there may be an opportunity for thinking creatively around what are data contracts that can come with skills data to help mitigate bias.
Yeah.
I guess the one thing that I might want to add is, there are certain organizations that are doing skills mapping. So basically like a visual representations, of the skill sets. So probably, make that more transparent if we are using that within this context. of identifying biases.
Right. Wonderful. So I have just got notice we have 1 minute left, which is super, super interesting in the spirit of time. But I would love you to go to the Padlet board, and I'm curious what the ethics of AI means to everyone here. It's something that's core that we are starting to really look at in the design of this project. So what is the ethics of AI mean? And if you could post your response on the Padlet board, that would be amazing. These boards are going to stay open. I'm going to ask our design team to email you the follow-up questions, because we would love to explore this more deeply and come up with potentially some guides, codes of guides for the ethics of AI in the Experience You project. It definitely feels shorter than 15, 20 minutes. But this is a big thing. One thing at Digital Promise, for us, it's all about how do we design in the lens and the experience of the person who is actually most impactful or benefited from this technology. So your language, your lens, if you can add to the Padlet board, that would be great. So we get your voice and perspective, not just our interpretation of what you're saying and thinking. But what does the ethics of AI mean to you? I'm going to follow up with a couple more prompts. I believe in 40 seconds, we will be out of this. Thank you, everyone, for contributing so far and getting the conversation started on the ethics of AI for the Experience You project. And I hope I get to hang out with you all again for like 45 minutes so that we can really go down this rabbit hole. You can also find me at kpage@digitalpromise.com or go to digitalpromise.com. We're a national nonprofit that centers equity and inclusion in the design of technology and digital learning experiences in K-12, post-secondary, and employment spaces. So happy to get to know you